There's absolutely no doubt surfers have a complex relationship with sharks. When you choose to enter the water, it's a simple fact. The level of risk is higher. We take risks in all factions of life. When you get in a car, you run the risk of being in a road traffic accident. If you smoke, you run the risk of damaging your lungs. Risk-taking is part and parcel of who we are as human beings. If you were to ask surfers who surf in waters where large predatory sharks are present, is it worth the risk? I imagine the vast majority of those surfers would say, hell yeah, it's worth the risk, whilst simultaneously giving you one of these. Anyway, for people who don't surf, I imagine that's quite a hard thing to understand, especially considering surfers tend to make up the majority of shark attack victims. In 2023, that number was 42%. When sharks and surfers come to blows, it's generally highly publicised and will almost always receive a fair amount of media attention. And on occasion, it's even caught on film. Mick Fanning's run-in with a white shark in South Africa during a surf competition springs to mind, alongside Shannon Ainsley, who managed to survive a double white shark attack, again in South Africa. But despite these pretty shocking incidents, surfers generally aren't afraid of sharks. A study published in 2022 revealed that despite many surfers having interactions with sharks, namely seeing one while surfing, knowing someone who'd been bitten, or actually being bitten themselves, 60% of them said they weren't afraid of sharks, and 44% said if a shark had been spotted, it wouldn't stop them from going in the water. That's all to do with the behavioral psychology principle of operant conditioning. I won't bore you all with the intricate details, but it basically means that surfers who encounter a shark but don't get bitten, that then reinforces their psychology of surfing with sharks and not being afraid. So the majority of surfers aren't really afraid of sharks and consider the actual risk to be pretty low. None more so than the surfers who hit the waves off San Diego. You'll have seen the videos before from people like the Malibu Artist and Great White Drone, who both operate out of Southern California. The videos regularly show great white sharks swimming incredibly close to surfers and swimmers. You might be forgiven for thinking they're getting so close that they're surely going to bite, but they never do. This seems to be in stark contrast to the white shark populations in other parts of the world, namely South Africa and Australia, where attacks on surfers are more common than they are in California. But the question here is why? Why are these sharks in Southern California ignoring humans? Welcome back to another Shark Bytes episode, everyone. So we've gathered so far that shark incidents are pretty rare in California, but that doesn't mean there aren't any. In the state of California, over the last 72 years, there have been 15 shark-related fatalities. That's about one every 4 or 5 years or so, which, when you look at the number of people in the water and the number of sharks in the water, is a somewhat surprising statistic. There's also been a fair number of non-fatal incidents or non-injury incidents in California down the years as well, which does somewhat appear to be increasing since around the 1970s. One of which literally happened last Sunday in Del Mar County, just north of San Diego. In typical Shark Bytes fashion, where the sharks like to make my life as difficult as possible, this happened about 4 days after I had finished editing this video. Sod's law. So to keep you all in the loop, I've come back to insert this little voiceover update. Del Mar has had a couple of incidents in recent years, predominantly on swimmers, with a lady being bitten back in 2022, and then the man who was bitten while on a group swim this Sunday just gone in 2024. Both incidents resulted in injuries but were non-fatal, and the bites likely came from juvenile white sharks who would have bitten, had a bit of a thrash around, and then just let go. Interestingly here though, we do have some contextual information about the conditions on the day, with the sky said to be cloudy and overcast, and the water being murky with low visibility. These two factors here will have undoubtedly played a role. This slight uptick in recent years does have a fairly simple explanation though. Back in the mid-1900s, you didn't really have as many people using the water as you do now, and there weren't as many white sharks. The waters off California weren't as healthy in terms of their marine biodiversity back then, and sharks were heavily fished as well, largely unregulated. These days you've got a lot more people using the water and a species in the white shark that's now protected, so it means you have more sharks. Alongside this, with the wide availability of smartphones, GoPros, drones, and social media, accurate reporting has also been higher than in previous decades. 40 years ago, a shark bumping a swimmer or a surfer in the water would have just been chatted about between friends. These days though, something like that is caught on film and is shared online and watched by millions of people. As we've learned in previous Shark Bytes episodes, when you've got more people using the water in an area where there's a higher density of predatory sharks, you're going to have more shark-related incidents, regardless of whether they result in an injury or not. In Southern California though, you've got about a 97% human-shark co-occurrence rate. Essentially, where there's a white shark, there's almost always a surfer nearby. But the sharks here in this part of California just ignore those surfers. They essentially treat them like flotsam on the surface of the water, which is something you just don't see in other parts of the world. In fact, for white sharks, it hasn't been duplicated anywhere else. Australia as an entire country has nearly half the population size of the state of California, but has considerably more shark attacks involving white sharks. Statistically, it doesn't make a lot of sense, aside from the fact that everything in Australia wants to kill you.
Come to Australia, you might accidentally get killed.
But if you look at the numbers, excluding the odd few here or there, it seems to be South Africa and Australia that tend to crop up the most when we talk about great white shark attacks on humans. On top of this, both Australia and South Africa perform shark mitigation measures in the form of culling and have done for the last 50 years or so. But on the flip side, California doesn't. When you're looking at factors like water conditions and sea state, South California, South Africa, and Australia all seem to match up as fairly similar. The water is regularly turbid and murky because of the waves that those surfers are keen to ride, so it's not got much to do with visibility, and sharks perhaps not being able to see particularly well in those turbid waters. As of currently, we haven't been able to prove whether it's behavioral or personality differences between these shark populations. But it is an interesting suggestion. Perhaps these isolated populations in different parts of the world simply differ in their behavior. Does a shark choose to bite and on occasion eat a human because it's sick or unwell? Is it starving, or is it just bored? Why does one guy start a fight at a football game and you don't? Differing contextual situations for the individual sharks or differing personality traits could both potentially be playing a role in situations where there are shark attacks. We've seen lots of cases where sharks have consumed humans who have then gone on to be captured and killed by fishermen, and it's been shown that they were of ill health. Although not white sharks, that's been demonstrated in the Red Sea with oceanic whitetips and tiger sharks. I suppose the same could easily apply to white sharks as well. It's not a huge stretch to think that behavior and personality could be playing a role, because these shark populations are different. They have different hunting strategies. For example, the South African white sharks will regularly breach entirely out of the water when they hunt. And that's not often seen in different parts of the world. Okay, it does happen here or there, but it's really mostly happening in South Africa. They hunt and act differently in different parts of the world. It's like saying that South African people are different to Australian people, who are different to Californian people. These shark populations behaviorally are unique. As well as this, they're perhaps feeding on slightly different things. White sharks in California have a ready supply of marine mammals to feed on, and seal populations are doing quite well in this part of the world. Australia and South Africa also have seal populations, but they might not be as numerable in certain parts of those countries, and so the sharks have to vary their diet a bit more to feed on other things. Thinking along the same lines, seal populations in the US might recover faster than in other parts of the world as well, so that could be another additional factor. More food around means the sharks are going to be less desperate to go out of their way for an easy meal like a human. Now, I know at this point there's going to be a lot of you sat behind your screens going, wait a second, Chris, the white sharks in California are juveniles. Surely that's playing a role. And yeah, this is a good point to make, because you'd be absolutely correct. A lot of these white sharks that are swimming around surfers are juveniles. Not all of them, but a fair few. The juvenile white sharks look like they range anywhere from about 6 foot to just below 10 foot, and generally you can see that when you compare them to the size of the surfboards. And at that size, these white sharks are undoubtedly younger individuals. During this life stage, juvenile white sharks will tend to feed on a variety of fish species, which they'll be looking for in and around the shallows. Stingrays, smaller sharks, schooling fish, and squids will all be on the menu for these guys as they hunt off San Diego. Now, just because they're juveniles, it doesn't mean they couldn't cause any damage. Any shark species over 6 foot in length can cause serious harm to a human if it were to bite. But these juveniles are more inquisitive than anything else. They're young, they're exploring their environment, which is why you'll often see the clips of them going right up to the surfers and swimmers to check them out at close range, before eventually then realizing they're not interested and turning away. Although, if the reason that these sharks weren't really biting people was because they're juveniles, then why do juvenile white sharks bite people in other parts of the world? If you scan over a lot of the non-fatal white shark bites from different places around the world, you'll see that many of them are from juvenile white sharks. These are sharks that range in size somewhere between 7 and 10 feet long, which is very similar to the sizes of the white sharks that we're seeing in Southern California. Juvenile white shark vision has been scientifically demonstrated to be relatively poor, and they're still learning about what is food and what isn't food in their environment, which could explain why younger individuals around the world end up biting humans every now and again. But it doesn't explain why they're ignoring them in Southern California. Interestingly here, every now and again you'll get a bigger white shark that decides to venture into the surf break to have a look around. And it appears that even these larger ones are pretty uninterested in the surfers. As they get older and larger, their diet will have switched more towards marine mammals like Californian sea lions, so you'd think the surfers might be more at risk. But 99% of the time, they're really not. The adults don't care about surfers or swimmers either. It's a really strange thing that's happening off San Diego, and researchers are actively looking into it, particularly the ones at California State University Long Beach Shark Lab. God, that is a mouthful. CSULB Shark Lab, that's easier. Anyway, the shark scientists there are actively investigating the behaviors of this shark population and their relationship with humans. If they figure out precisely why they're ignoring humans, then that could be applied to different white shark populations in other parts of the world. Although if it does come down to behavior or personality traits for this specific population, then it's probably not going to be applicable elsewhere. I do wonder whether it could be something like conditioning or exposure to humans though, i.e. these young sharks are being exposed to surfers and swimmers from a young age, and that means they learn that they're not their intended prey source. I'm not sure, it's just something interesting to speculate on. As always with sharks though, it's likely a bunch of different factors that are all combining together. That's often the case. I am quite keen to hear what all your thoughts are on this. Why do you think these sharks in San Diego are ignoring surfers? Make sure you let me know what you think in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and make sure you hit that subscribe button below. But before you head off, if you enjoyed today's video about great white sharks, then you might quite like this one right here. In it, I have a look at the different ways that the moon affects sharks. For a long time, people have suggested that the moon could be playing a role in shark attacks, and in this video, I answer that question, so make sure you check it out here.